Hi, thank you. So as mentioned, I'm Elizabeth Delmelle, Director of the Master of Urban Spatial Analytics program at the University of Pennsylvania. And I'm going to be talking about some of the work I've been doing with my wonderful colleague, Dr. Isabel Nilsson, who's over there, from UNC Charlotte. So our work looks at using property listing data to understand neighborhood change. And so before I get into the research, I'm going to indulge you in a little story about how this whole research idea came about. And so Isabel and I were working on another research project looking at the impact of new transit lines on neighborhood change. And at that time in Charlotte, a new light rail line had just opened. And so we decided to get on the train and get off at every station and just sort of assess the neighborhoods as they were at the moment that the train opened. And at one particular station, we were walking around, and I was having a really hard time just picking up what was going on in this neighborhood. So instinctively, I pulled out my phone, and I pulled up the Zillow app, and as I was standing right there, this advertisement popped up. And it said that this property is a builder's dream, a level, durable lot within walking distance to the new light rail station. The station stop is quickly becoming a major retail and entertainment hub. A little debatable from that picture. The house is tenant occupied. And so what I picked up was, well, this is kind of the real estate agent's vision for how this property might be in the future, right? They're advertising it as a lot. You can tear down the house. And so that led to this light bulb moment where we thought, can these real estate advertisements predict the neighborhood's future? And the reason why that was so interesting is that we've been studying neighborhood change for a long time, but most of our traditional data sources for understanding neighborhood change are retrospective, right? By the time you download census data and it registers a change in the median household income, the processes that led to that change have been in play long before. And so having something that's a little more contemporaneous was really attractive and exciting. And so these real estate listings, as we just observed, are kind of the real estate agent has a particular clientele in mind, and they use certain keywords to try to attract that home buyer to the neighborhood. And it was also exciting because because these real estate listings contain detailed information about the housing and neighborhood characteristics at a really micro-geographic scale, which is hard to get using traditional GIS data sources. So we were excited by this, which led to our first research objective to figure out whether or not this was even worthwhile pursuing. And so our first objective just tried to connect how properties are marketed with the characteristics of people responding to the advertisements. So to do so, we used two major data sources. The first was multiple listing data sources from service data from CoreLogic. So we just focused on the city of Charlotte, North Carolina for our first study. We had data from 2001 to 2020 and about 158,000 geocoded listings. And then to get characteristics of people who might be responding to the ads, we turned to the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act, HMDA data. So every time you apply for a mortgage in the US, your race, your income, and other characteristics are also recorded in a national database that is freely available and released annually with a census-tracked identifier. So those are our two data sets. So the first thing we had to do was kind of make sense of this property listing data. So as I mentioned, we had about 158,000 listings, and each one has a lot of text associated with it, all of those words. So to make sense of all of those words, we need to classify it. And after trying several different methods, we settled on using a semi-supervised classification approach where we had a little bit more of control to make sure that the results made theoretical sense with how we understand housing markets and housing to be. And so the theory we relied on is this housing life cycle or filtering theory that goes something like this. So you have a new house that's built, and over time, that house starts to age, and the characteristics become a little bit dated. And if that continues along that path, the house eventually becomes disinvested, maybe abandoned and vacant. Or if that house is on some valuable land, it becomes an opportunity for reinvestment, right? And once it's reinvested, everything has been made over. So given that framework, we came up with 5 different classes, and then we were able to feed the algorithm some keywords, some kind of breadcrumbs, to help it then learn and classify all 158,000 listings. So just give you a quick overview of our 5 different classes and some of the characteristics we fed it. So we have a new suburban class. These are typically advertised to families. They often feature schools and playgrounds. We have our disinvested class. So here's an example where the text says, this Charlotte cul-de-sac home has 1 story, the house is vacant and cleaned regularly. It doesn't tell us anything about a single amenity or this is a great opportunity to make a profit. It's simply a structure. Then we have our opportunities. So these often mention investors or come in and flip, use your imagination. Then we have these expensive investments that mention really high-end appliances, luxury, custom details. And then our renewed class were once opportunities, but they have been flipped. They tend to be in historic districts, they're walkable, and they mention some kind of renovation or remodeling. So those are our 5 classes, and so we set the algorithm off to learn and classify all of our listings. So then to kind of verify how well the classification worked, we mapped out the results. And so this is a map of the results. So on the top, I think I can do this. Okay. So in Charlotte, we often characterize the city between these 2 dichotomies. We have what we call the crescent of poverty. And we can see that, here we go, most of our disinvested housing is located, in fact, in that crescent of poverty, which is also where we have generally low-income mortgage applicants and the highest share of Black mortgage applicants. And then conversely, we talk about this wedge of wealth down here. That's where we have our expensive investments and largely white population and upper-income home buyers. And then new suburban homes are classified, fortunately, in the suburbs, right? So it really added up with how we understand the real estate landscape to be in the city. So that was great. So the next step was to actually connect these characteristics with the mortgage lending data. And so to do that, we just ran a simple non-scary model, which says here that we're explaining the share of mortgage applicants belonging to a certain racial or income category as a function of the share of properties categorized in each one of our 5 categories the year before. So I'm just going to show you a few of our results. So the first one makes sense, which is great. Well, they all make sense. So what we see here is, for example, as the share of expensive investments in a census tract increases, so does the share of more upper-income mortgage applicants, which is exactly what we would want to see, right? So the higher and higher the concentration of expensive homes, the more upper-income applicants we see. Then on the flip side, we can see that low-income applicants generally purchase homes advertised as those disinvested housing, especially as the concentration of disinvestment increases. And they're also the ones buying these opportunities, especially as there are more and more opportunities, maybe before that opportunity has become realized. Now, given the stark patterns of racial segregation in the city of Charlotte, we were expecting that when we did this by race, we would get the exact same results as I just showed you between high and low income. But in fact, there was one important distinction. So if we look at the share of Black applicants, they are basically exclusively purchasing homes in areas where the houses are only advertised as disinvestment. And they are not at all purchasing these opportunities to make a profit, to generate wealth over time. Whereas the share of white applicants are not buying homes at all in the disinvestment and purchasing homes in all of these other types of neighborhoods. So even when we ran the model controlling for income, and we just looked at racial differences among high and low home buyers, we saw these same racial segregation just based on the text advertisements. So the main takeaway from this is that just using the words, just using the text on how the property is advertised, we picked up these really strong segregating patterns in the housing market, which is... So then we decided to dig a little bit deeper and this is some ongoing work, and we wanted to look at how the language had changed in neighborhoods as the racial composition of that neighborhood was changing. So here we got more data for the entire US, and so we focused on 10 US cities, or their core counties, and we just filtered out from the census data neighborhoods that had seen a dramatic either increase in the share of white residents or decrease in the share of white residents. And then we identified the words that were most associated with those two types of neighborhoods. So a quick overview on what we found here. So over time, the words most associated with a significant increase in the share of white residents. We can see historic, downtown, restaurants, and we can also see some interesting trends over time. For example, granite was really cool back in 2008, now not so much. And then on the flip side, those associated with white flight from 2000 to 2020, we see these suburban characteristics. So they tend to mention schools, shopping malls, vinyl, playground, carpet, library, kind of public amenities. We then broke it down by the 10 cities just to pick out some patterns. So these are just some word clouds for each one of our 10 cities of the white influx census tracts. So again, we can pick out bungalow homes, craftsman-style homes, these kind of unique historic characteristics, except for Las Vegas, which is very much an outlier. There it's golf and condos. And then for the other end of the spectrum, the neighborhoods that saw a significant decline in the share of white residents, again, golf and tennis and suburban characteristics, right? Garages, backyards, schools, and so on. So what that is starting to tell us is that we get this really clear picture of what we call this great inversion that has been happening over the past 20 years. We're an increasing share of white residents moving to the center cities and really valuing arts and historic districts and kind of historic homes. And then this new geography of white flight, so these older suburban homes with dated characteristics, vinyl, carpet. And kind of ironically, these are previously suburban neighborhoods that were created, desired, and protected by whites, and now they're no longer desirable, right? And so now we see kind of a flip in what's happening. So that is what we're up to. And again, thanks to Isabel for doing so much hard work and funding from the National Science Foundation.